Hey, Warpugs. So, History of Everything mentioned that Tasting History with Max Miller had done something on Anzac Biscuits. He actually made them, and had made them as faithful as one could possibly make them. Now, me, personally, I'm a fan of food. I'm a fan of Tasting History with Max Miller, and I'm a fan of History of Everything. Guys, it's a match made in heaven at this point. So, with today, the day that this is being released in Australia and New Zealand being Anzac Day, I figured, why not do something, just do both on biscuits. Let's go. Why not? You know? So the Anzac biscuit is something that up until literally a few hours ago, I had no idea about. And then we checked out History of Everything, and his entire thing on the Anzac biscuit, and I find it particularly heartwarming that you can get thrown in jail over calling it something else. But at the same time, I find it ridiculous that that's controversial. Some things should be held sacred. But he said that Max Miller had done the Anzac biscuit justice, which I'm hoping to do. Me and the hospitaler have ordered the golden syrup, and we're having that delivered, and it should be here in time for me to do something with it. I hope. So if you guys see a live stream coming up later if you guys see a live stream coming up in about an hour or so, that's what's up. Guys, we're going to be checking out this, however, and we're going to see somebody who can actually cook making Anzac biscuits. And then, if everything goes okay and I manage to get my hands on the ingredients, you can watch somebody who cannot cook make Anzac biscuits. Warpugs, thank you for joining me for this. To all of you in Australia and New Zealand currently, I was told it's not right to say celebrating or observing Anzac Day. I hope you're having a good day. I hope you're spending time with people that matter to you. And thank you for watching me in the middle of everything. Let's get into this. Anzac biscuits from World War I.
Anzac Biscuits, rock-hard ration from World War I, or delicious oatmeal baked good from Australia and New Zealand? Well, why not both, though I'm going to venture a guess as to which one I'm going to prefer. So thank you to Babbel for sponsoring this video as we make Anzac Biscuits from World War I and from just afterward, this time on Tasting History.
Yummy!
So what is Anzac anyway? Well, it's an acronym for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, and it generally refers to those Aussie and Kiwi soldiers who fought in World War I. On April 25, 1915, Anzac forces landed at what would become known as Anzac Cove during the Gallipoli campaign. They drove the Turkish forces off of the shore and into the hills. But with a beachhead established, they pretty much just stayed there, bogged down in a stalemate of trench warfare for 8 long months.
In terms, this was considered Winston Churchill's greatest failure during World War I. It was something that he never really got rid of the stain of, and for practically good reasons. And it's kind of interesting how both nations, well, all three nations, sorry, both nations, New Zealand, Australia, and Turkey got along after all of this was said and done.
Finally, in December of 1915, the Anzac forces retreated, followed by the rest of the Allied forces a month later. Militarily, it was a disaster for both sides, though especially the Allied side, but it is considered to be the beginning of a national consciousness for both Australia and New Zealand. And just a few months after the retreat, on April 25, 1916, the first Anzac Day was observed. And in later years, the day included the eating of biscuits, Anzac biscuits, and we are going to make a recipe from 1926 from Rockhampton, Queensland.
Yay!
Anzac biscuits. 2 breakfast cupfuls John Bull oats, half a cupful sugar, 1 scant cupful plain flour, half a cupful melted butter. Mix 1 tablespoon golden syrup, 2 tablespoons boiling water, and 1 teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda until they froth. Then add the melted butter.
Sweet.
Mix the dry ingredients and drop in spoonfuls on a floured slide. Bake in a slow oven.
Nice.
Now, someday I hope to travel to Australia and New Zealand, and luckily when I get there, I won't really have to worry about the language because they speak English. But if you are traveling...
I will have to worry about being understood there if I don't mind my P's and Q's, because my accent comes out rather thick sometimes, so they might look at me, we'll be looking at each other rather strangely. It is the nature of the beast.
To someplace that does not speak English, might I suggest you sign up for a subscription to our sponsor, Babbel. Babbel is the #1 language learning app in the world with over 10 million subscribers. I like that the lessons are short, just about 10 minutes, so I can easily fit them into my schedule, and I love that you learn more than just a list of vocabulary words, because Babbel also teaches you about the culture, the slang, and the food and drink of the country where the language is spoken. And that's perfect because I plan on going to Mexico in a couple months, and so I'm brushing up on my Spanish so I don't make a complete fool of myself when ordering food. Quiero tacos al pastor, sin cebolla, por favor.
I feel like such an idiot sometimes that I can't speak more than English, but that is the nature. And, you know, it is kind of the nature of living in America. You know, it's one thing when somebody a state away speaks a different language. It's another thing entirely when, yeah, you got to drive 5 days to get to a place where they speak something other than English.
I also love that they have podcasts, so I can even practice in the car. So if you're planning on doing some traveling, or if you just want to learn a new language to improve yourself and keep your brain active, then make sure to sign up for Babbel using my link in the description to get 65% off.
My brain
Plus,
isn't
Babbel now
active.
offers a 20-day money-back guarantee, so make sure to sign up today. Now for this recipe, what you'll need is 2 cups or 200 grams of rolled oats, a half cup or 100 grams of sugar, 1 cup or 120 grams of flour, a half cup or 113 grams melted salted butter, 1 tablespoon golden syrup. Golden syrup's kind of hard to find in the US, so I'll put a link in the description to where you can get that. 2 tablespoons of water, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda.
Sweet.
So this is very similar to how they're still made today, though often today they have coconut, and coconut does go back quite a ways, but this recipe doesn't have any. What this recipe also has is a lot more oats than would be in a typical recipe today.
Okay.
But this is the one that we're making, so for this, start by whisking together the flour, sugar, and the oats. Then in a small saucepan, mix together the golden syrup and water and heat until simmering. Then add in the baking soda and whisk it until it froths. Then pour in the melted butter and remove it from the heat. Pour the liquid into the dry ingredients and mix until just combined.
Okay.
Measure out 1 tablespoon of batter, then roll it into a ball and flatten it into a patty, then place it on a lined baking sheet. Repeat this until all of the dough is used, and pop them in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 Celsius for 15 minutes or until they're a nice golden brown.
Sweet.
Then take them out of the oven and let them cool for 5 minutes before transferring them to a wire rack to cool completely.
Nice.
And while they cool, you would be wise to do nothing. But I am not wise, so I decided to make an entire other version, the Anzac biscuit that would have been eaten by the soldiers at Gallipoli. These were part of the soldiers' daily ration, and many of them would call them Anzac wafers or sometimes even Anzac tile. And tile is an apt word because they're really just a fancier version of hardtack.
Hardtack.
Now, I was not planning...
Oh, God. You know, History of Everything mentioned hardtack, and hardtack, I'm so glad we moved beyond those.
On making these. I was done with hardtack, but then the Australian War Memorial puts up a recipe that they got from one of the original manufacturers, Anzac Biscuits Limited. And so I just had to make them. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in.
Do it.
So for this recipe, what you'll need is 1 2/3 cups or 200 grams self-raising flour.
Okay.
Or if you have regular flour, just add 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. 3 1/3 cup or 400 grams of whole wheat flour,
okay.
1/4 cup or 50 grams of sugar, 3 tablespoons or 20 grams powdered milk, and a bit less than a cup or 220 milliliters of water with a pinch of salt stirred in.
Okay.
All you need to do is mix the 2 flours together, then the sugar and powdered milk, then pour in the water and work the dough until it comes together. Now it's going to be really, really dry. And so if you need to add more water to get the dough to come together, do, but add it very, very little at a time because you don't want to add any more than you have to.
Right.
After a few minutes of working it, it should be somewhat smooth. Then cover the dough and let it rest for 30 minutes.
Okay.
Afterward, roll the dough out to be 1/3 of an inch thick and then cut it into 3.5 inch squares. Then dock the biscuits by poking holes all the way down. There's a dispute of whether it should be 5 by 5 or 7 by 7 or even 6 by 6, so I'll let you decide. I did 7 by 7.
Dude, you're actually baking hardtack. This should be considered a war crime in many countries.
Then pop them in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 Celsius for 40 minutes, and you want them on the bottom shelf. Once the 40 minutes is over, turn off the oven and just let them cool inside of the oven. Now, while these are the true first Anzac biscuits, the first published recipes for Anzac biscuits came in 1916 in the Perth Sunday Times and was for an Anzac ginger biscuit, and then in 1917 as part of the War Chest Cookery book. And that recipe reminds me more of snickerdoodles with jam in the middle to make like a cinnamon snickerdoodle butter cookie.
That does
look
look like
sounds absolutely fantastic, and I'm not making
That does look like a snickerdoodle. I'm just saying.
those today, but I am going to put that recipe in the description so you can check that out if you want.
Okay.
Now, this cookbook included a lot of recipes for baked goods that could then be sold as a way to raise money for the war effort. And some of those recipes were for an oatmeal biscuit similar to Scottish oat cakes that would then become the Anzac biscuit that we know today.
Okay.
Now, the lore of the Anzac biscuit would have you believe that these were always packaged up and then put into airtight Billy tea cans and shipped off to the boys at the front. And sometimes that might be the case. But for the most part, sweet biscuits were not part of the daily ration of the Anzac soldier.
Right.
But if you give this video a like and subscribe to Tasting History, I'd be glad to tell you what was.
Ooh.
It
Yes.
is easy to think of biscuits without an army, but of an army without biscuits, never. That was from the Anzac book, written
Nice.
and illustrated in Gallipoli by the men of Anzac in 1916. And they had a lot to say about the different foods that they ate, but especially about the biscuits. Call to mind how your finest gold crown weakened, wobbled, and finally shriveled under the terrific strain of masticating Puntley and Chalmers No. 5s. Another maker of these biscuits. And these biscuits were so hard that the
That's the most inventive way of saying we don't like these ever.
soldiers would often use them as postcards, like this one from Frank Lemon to his mother sent from Gallipoli in 1915. And by World War II, soldiers had graduated to using them as canvases for edible, or rather inedible, art.
Nice.
One Anzac soldier, who I can only assume was a professional wine connoisseur back at home, decided that he wanted to try to describe what those original Anzac biscuits tasted like.
Okay.
Have you, reader, ever analyzed with due carefulness the taste of army biscuits? Is it the delicious succulency of ground granite, or the savory toothsomeness of powdered marble?
Sounds so delicious.
Do we perceive a delicate flavoring of ferro concrete with
Maybe.
just a dash of scraped iron railings?
Maybe, just maybe. And the smell. It smells like depression.
I just love that so much. Anyway, they would get about a pound of this every day, along with a pound of beef that was corned beef, and then it was canned with gelatin, and they called it bully beef, which was a play on the French bouillie de boeuf. And it doesn't seem to be as despised as the biscuits, but only just. It's bad enough to be eating bully beef, but carrying it as well is rotten. I couldn't look a decent bullock in the face now for what I've said about him when he's tinned. I really wish I could do a good Australian accent, but it turns out I can't. My Australian hairdresser told me, don't do that.
Don't do that.
So I'm not. But imagine, it would be even better in an Australian accent.
You have a hairdresser. I am so jealous of you right now. Babe, I need a hairdresser.
What hair?
Moving on.
Anyway, the men would often pick wild thyme, which grew all over the area in Gallipoli, but foraging in that area could be very dangerous because most of the plants were inedible and some were poisonous, like many varieties of hemlock. So the Turkish soldiers probably had a leg up when it came to foraging because they knew all of the native flora. They also knew how to get water from many of the plants, which would have been a real benefit to the Anzac soldiers. See, in addition to the bully beef, when available, the soldiers received...
Look at that face right there. Is that not the face of pure culinary delight?
a quarter pound of bacon, some cheese, and some beans, peas, or dried potatoes. And the problem with these foods is that one, many of them needed to be rehydrated, and two, they were often packed with salt for preservation, which makes you really thirsty. And that wasn't a problem at the beginning of the campaign because each man was getting a little over a gallon and a quart of water, fresh water, every single day. But that didn't last very long.
No.
See, other than those plants that provided some water, there was no fresh water source at Anzac Cove, and so the water had to be shipped in from the Greek islands and would be under bombardment the entire time that they were trying to offload onto the beaches. So it wasn't long before the water ration got cut by 75% to just over 1 quart of fresh water per soldier each day. And when this happened, the quartermaster got a call. The sergeant cook was the caller, and he was angry and hostile. How the can I cook 70 beef teas, 40 puddings, and 200 milk diets with this bloomin' quarter issue of water I get? If you want them bloomin' milk diets, you gotta get me water, or cook them yourself. And sadly, no, I don't know what that bleeped word was supposed to be, so you'll just have to use your imagination.
You can imagine relatively easily what that word was.
And luckily, he was able to get more water after complaining, so he could make those milk diets. And a milk diet is exactly what it sounds like. It's rehydrated, powdered milk that was given to soldiers pretty much exclusively who had bled a lot because it was thought to make you produce more blood. Other foods that would occasionally trickle in were things like onions to help make a stew from the bully beef and some sweetened condensed milk to make porridge from the hardtack. But the one thing they seemed to have plenty of was tea, which was enjoyed with pretty much every meal,
Nice.
as long as you add some fresh water. They also had plenty of sugar and McConaughey's marmalade. Now, a few months into the campaign, during the fiercest fighting, the YMCA, who had commissary huts set up in London and some of the base camps, got the okay to move closer to the front line. Well, it was dangerous to do this at Anzac Cove because they were under bombardment the entire time that they were coming ashore.
Yeah.
But they eventually set up in a small dugout near Reserve Gully out of the line of sight of snipers. But even then, one night a fragment of Turkish shell weighing 12.5 pounds found its way through the roof of that dugout. But at this
That's not a fragment.
YMCA hut, the soldiers could get nuts and raisins, fresh bread, cakes, fruits, vegetables, cigarettes, and all sorts of other things to make life a little bit more bearable. But there were tens of thousands of Anzac soldiers, so one YMCA hut could only do so much.
Right.
And so many of the soldiers suffered from scurvy and pellagra and other illnesses that came from a lack of vitamins. And so at the end of the campaign, the average soldier lost 28 pounds. But let's say you did get some of those goodies. You could either eat them yourself or you could trade them for something else. What's interesting is with whom you might be doing the trading.
Barter culture is a real thing in the military.
See, it was often the Ottoman Turks, those people in the trenches just across from you trying to kill you.
Yep.
See, the Turks, who were also underfed, had at least different food. Olive oil, coffee, dried fruit, nuts, grape compote, and lots of fresh bread.
You see, I didn't know about this, but it really doesn't surprise me. Everybody hates wartime food.
And during the ceasefire, there was a lot of trading going on between the two sides. The Turks really liked the cigarettes and the condensed milk, while the Anzacs preferred the nuts and the dried fruit. Though when the Anzacs tried to send them the bully beef, they thought that it was pork, and so the Turks sent it back with a note saying, "Dear enemies, no pork, more cigarettes." But something I find really fascinating about this battle is the mutual respect that the two sides had for each other.
And that is something very, very surprising about this whole engagement. The camaraderie between the Turks and the Australian New Zealand Army Corps is actually something else. It is actually quite surprising to learn about.
There's actually a monument at Gallipoli, which is based on an actual event, where after raising a white flag, a Turkish soldier carried a wounded Australian officer to the Australian lines and returned before the fighting resumed. And this mutual respect seems to have been a theme because I found a poem called Anzac, published in 1916, written by an Australian soldier who wrote it just after he left Gallipoli. And it's a really long poem, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read a few stanzas.
Okay.
This last 6 months, I reckon, will be most of my life to me. Trenches and shells and snipers and the morning light on the sea. Thirst in the broiling midday, shouts and gasping cries. Big guns talk from the water. And flies, 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 flies. And all our trouble wasted, all of it gone for nix. Still, we kept up our end, and some of the story sticks. But seeing we had to clear, for we couldn't get on no more, I wish that instead of last night it had been the night before. Yesterday, poor Jim stopped one. 3 of us buried Jim. I know a woman in Sydney that thought the world of him. She was his mother, I'll tell her, broken with grief and pride. Mother was Jim's last whisper. That was all, and died. That's where it gets me twisted. The rest of it I don't mind. But it don't seem right for me to be off and to leave old Jim behind. Better there than in France, though, with the Germans' dirty work. I reckon the Turk respects us as we respect the Turk. Abdul's a good, clean fighter. We've fought him, and we know. And we've left him a letter behind us to tell him we found him so. And as sad as it is amazing to see such respect given between groups that were meant to be enemies.
Right.
After the war, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, Field Marshal of the Turkish forces and later President of Turkey, said, "There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets. You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now living in our bosom and are in peace. Having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well."
Imagine. I mean, that's enough to bring a tear to your eye. That right there, that's enough to bring a tear to your eye. When I first learned about how much the two sides respected each other, it blew my mind. I have heard this quote before, and it stunned me back then. It still gets me kind of emotional now thinking about it. Because at what point have you ever heard of two forces fighting each other and the horrors of the kind of conditions that the two sides were fighting each other, and the leader of the invaded country says something like this?
And even today, every year on April 25th, a muted dawn service is held at Gallipoli by the Australian and New Zealand governments with the assistance of the Turkish government. Though I don't know if at that service they enjoy Anzac biscuits like the ones I'm about to eat. Now really, you should let these harden up for a few months, but I let mine harden for a few days, and they're pretty hard.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that
hardtack.
it's not like the other hardtack that I've made, because 1, there's sugar, 2, powdered milk, and 3, the sodium bicarbonate, the baking soda. There's like bubbles, which is very different. So I'm curious what the consistency is going to be like if I don't break a tooth. Let's have a go. You know, it's a little harder than I would want, but I can see
It's like trying to chew a concrete slab.
It up and putting it into things, but the flavor is so much better than regular hardtack. You know, it's
Not from months on end, it ain't.
not a lot of sugar, it's not a lot of milk powder, but there's something other than just flour and water, and it really makes a difference. That said, I'm going to guess that the other Anzac biscuits I'm going to prefer. Now, there is some controversy about the texture that these are supposed to be, whether they should be very crisp or a little bit chewy. This one started off chewy, and I was like, oh, okay, but it's gotten quite crisp just in a few hours after baking them. So let's give them a try. They're really, really good. Everyone should make these. They're sweet. They're you get a lot of the oatmeal. These are very heavy on the oatmeal, but they're sweet, but they're not overly sweet. It's the difference between an American cookie and an Australian or New Zealand biscuit. And you do have to call this a biscuit. You cannot say Anzac cookie.
Right.
It's forbidden by the Minister of Veterans Affairs in Australia.
We just checked out History's video about this itself, and I thought it was hilarious, and I'm still throwing the hospital in jail.
Actually control what can be called an Anzac biscuit, and they say that it has to be called biscuit, not a cookie. And frankly, these would not pass muster today, nor would many of those very first recipes for Anzac biscuits. It's got to be this oatmeal style, and And I'm okay with that because it's delicious. So make sure to follow me on Instagram, Tasting History with Max Miller, and I will see you next time on Tasting History.
Nice. Nice. I'm actually kind of hyped to make these now. Now, mine are not going to look as good as his did. Mine are not going to look remotely good. They're probably going to look horrifying. I apologize to everyone for the carnage I'm about to unleash upon a baking pan. Guys. I'm going to make this an annual thing where I watch something, where we check out something together about Anzac Day. I'm going to be doing some more, getting more into holidays such as this. I hope that everybody in Australia and New Zealand enjoy their Anzac biscuits and enjoy the day. Okay. To those of you who are celebrating, well, not really celebrating, observing, I'm sorry. We say celebrating Memorial Day, we say celebrating Veterans Day over here in the States. So it's kind of a hard habit to break when you have that kind of analog together. But I hope those of you who are observing Anzac Day have a good day with family, friends. I hope that that is the case. Warpugs, thank you so much for watching this. My biscuits will look horrible in comparison to everything we've seen so far. I'm hoping that I'm struggling to when I'm actually going to be able to make these. I'm hoping to be able to do it to where it is the 25th in Australia and New Zealand. I'm hoping that's going to be the case, but if it's not, I do apologize in advance. Guys, subscribe to Tasting History with Max Miller. Subscribe to me if you haven't already. Join as a member of Patreon for early access, and I'll catch you guys next time.